And welcome to Twitter Marketing Week 3. This week we are diving specifically into ads. Now, in my Facebook marketing class, I teach ads over 2 weeks. Now, Facebook does have a level of complexity beyond Twitter, but every time I look at Twitter, they add new features in their ads platform. So if you've taken Facebook marketing, this will be familiar to you. If you haven't, there are some sort of background information on interest targeting and cost per click and bidding that I'll put up in the in Blackboard as an extra resource for you that might be helpful to just get up to speed on what it's like to buy an ad campaign. Also, I ran a tweet poll on Monday of this week asking how many of you are interested in learning about Twitter ads, and actually ended up 50-50, I care, I don't care, which was super interesting because I would figure that given, like anything, organic and earned content versus paid, paid is such an effective way to propel your message forward to new audiences. So I was surprised that there's some of you that aren't interested in it. Not a bad thing, just surprised me in the results, and that's why we run polls. All right, so this says metrics continued, but it means metrics introduced, and then we'll look at some more Twitter metrics next week as well. But for now, advertising. So here's a short little video that I'll put up for you to watch because you can't hear it as I'm running this video at the same time, but it's a nice little intro on why would you build Twitter advertising? Why would you pay for your tweets to get posted, and why is it helpful as a small business? So this is a really great video for you to watch just as the introduction to Twitter ads. All right, so there are a few key distinctions in buying advertising on Twitter that's important. The two most important of all would be promoting your tweets in a search, meaning search.twitter.com, or if you're looking over at the search icon on a mobile device, versus seeing promoted tweets in the timeline. And I thought it was so interesting in the discussion for the week that some of you noted that you hadn't actually seen promoted tweets in your timeline before, which means you're not on a targeted list. And I would love to know why that is. That might be you have cookies turned off, so you have no retargeting happening. It could be because you haven't engaged with brands who are promoting in the past, or you're just generally not that active on Twitter. So when you're thinking about where do I want my content to appear, there is an important distinction around, do I want my content to appear in search, where you're, in some cases known as buying hashtags. Sorry, I'll go back for a second. Or in the timeline, where that content is supposed to be relevant to the user who's seeing it based on the types of followers that they have, the types of links that they click on in Twitter, and the websites that they visit where cookies are turned on. And that's known as retargeting or lookalike audiences. Whoop, going the wrong way. All right, so from Twitter, some important content to know is that promoted tweets are known as ordinary tweets that are purchased by the advertiser in order to reach a larger audience. So the nice way to break this down is to think about, I've got a tweet. This is not necessarily an ad, just an existing tweet. But I want it to reach a wider audience, so I'm going to boost it. The same way there's promoted posts on Facebook where you boost existing content, you can boost a tweet to have it be seen by more users. This is really effective if, say, you had a tweet that went viral, or you were running a contest or an event or a live chat, and you wanted that content, it was doing well, you were seeing good response from that tweet, and you want it to go out to more people. That can be really effective. You should note that all promoted content is labeled as promoted. We'll look at examples like that. So although it looks like a regular tweet, there is some identification that this is an advertisement. And you should know that users can definitely turn off promoted ads. They can say, don't show me this again. And promoted tweets are first displayed as regular tweets in the timelines of the people that are following the account. And in some cases, they're promoted, ads are promoted to people who are not followers of that account. So when you're looking at search, in some ways it's known as buying hashtags. So it's basically like paying to show up in the trending list, because people are often looking at what's trending on Twitter, and you can promote to show up in that list. So in a lot of cases, what's interesting about having a promoted hashtag or promoted trend when you show up in the search is that you're basically buying the placement in a top 10 list. So if you think about Google, in how brands, advertisers, basically anyone who has a website always wants their brand page to show up in the first top 10 in a Google search. The same is true on Twitter, where when you're looking at trends, you really hope that your brand, your hashtag, whatever you're promoting, shows up in the top 10 list of trends. Now, remember, trends are both global and local, as a recap from last week. So you can buy at a local level or a global level, and of course, there's going to be cost differences for that. So if we look at, say, here's some screenshots of in search or in the trend feed versus in the actual feed. Two screenshots here. So on the left, what you're looking at is the trends of when I grabbed this week, and we can see things like breaking news. We can see Artiox, they announced that they're being acquired by Pandora and going bankrupt. Charlie Sheen, lots of Toronto, so local news, local trends relevant to me and the types of content that I engage with, and the trends that are local for my area. But we also see this Tim Hortons warm wishes trend. Now, is the warm wishes hashtag trending organically on Twitter? No, probably not. But I'm seeing that Tim Hortons is running a hashtag holiday campaign on Twitter. At the same time I go to look what's happening in news on Twitter. So it's a really great way to get my attention quickly. And if you ask me, almost more effective than promoted tweets, because I tend to scan really quickly through a feed. So if you look on the right, we see this content from Dick Costello, and then we see the promoted tweet from the Oscars, and then Richard. And if you're like me on Twitter, you're kind of like looking for people you know on Twitter, or words or images that capture your attention, so you focus on that particular tweet. And I tend to tune out brands a lot of the time in my feed. Although the warm wishes Tim Hortons trend caught my attention. So in terms of impressions, definitely the hashtag in this specific case study was more effective to me than an in-feed promoted tweet. However, on the in-feed promoted tweets on the right here, you don't see any images, which is key to success. So looking at going into the timeline. So it used to be that promoted tweets would show up in the brand, show up for a user where you were already following that brand, but also now you can target users where there's a relevance based on interest targeting. So if somebody has indicated based on their activity on Twitter or the people that they follow that say they're interested in FIFA, international soccer tournament, without necessarily following FIFA, the organization, could have their content appear in, say, in my feed because I've talked about FIFA in the past. So that's called interest targeting. You should know that users can't opt out of seeing promoted tweets, but you can dismiss them or say that's not relevant to me. And you should note that once you say it's not relevant to you or don't want to see it, you will never see that tweet again. It's kind of like marking an email as spam. So what I notice when I look at promoted tweets in my feed, I see lots of things around social media marketing. Big surprise, guys. I'm a social media marketing instructor, and I'm an instructor of social media marketing online and on Twitter. So it's not a surprise that the type of content I would engage with would signal to Twitter based on cookies and interest targeting that I would be interested in things like social media marketing and big data, which is why I saw this tweet. There's also some other ones though, like here's one around cloud computing. Now when I saw this cloud computing tweet, I thought it was sort of interesting, even though it's a few years old now. I show it as a screenshot because I haven't necessarily talked about cloud computing in a long time. I used to work in a lot more cloud computing stuff when I was working in the nonprofit sector and helping nonprofits better use technology to be more effective in their jobs, which is it's a slight pivot from social media marketing in the marketing capacity role that I'm in now. However, when I saw this tweet, not only was it relevant to me, but I also thought it was such wonderful targeting because I am interested in cloud computing, even though I'm not currently tweeting or engaging with brands around that. But because I have a history of following brands in my feed, in my followers list that's now years and years old, I'm showing up on the list of likely to connect with this tweet. And you better believe I did absolutely follow up regarding this webinar. Same thing again on this idea of digital marketing. So what's another thing to note around this ad that I think is interesting around this web trends? It's a web trends ad, but you'll notice they threw in two pretty specific hashtags right within their ad, which is a nice way to do two things at once. It means that, because remember, promoted tweets in the timeline are actual tweets that go out to all of your followers, and because you've used hashtag, it goes out to everybody who's looking for or following a conversation on digital marketing, and it goes out to the people who they've decided to promote and target through an ad campaign. So in terms of bang for your buck, using a hashtag in an ad actually is a great way to make sure that it spreads even further. And here it is in the feed, just so that you know. Now, there is some criticism. So we see this tweet around promoted tweets highlight that brands do not have a clue about social media. I can't wait to discuss this in our feed this week, whether you want to discuss it publicly on Twitter or privately in the discussion board, because a lot of people say, you know, promoting tweets is just a way to get more followers, and you shouldn't care about getting followers. I even preach this. Don't worry about getting new followers, worry about having a conversation. However, in this day and age of noise and channels and volume, I think there's absolutely something to be said for brands wanting to reach audiences where there is relevant content to be made. Look at the cloud computing example that I posted. There are cases where I just would never have seen excuse me, I would have never seen that content otherwise if they hadn't promoted it in my feed. So I think it's fair game. Here's another interesting thing about ads, though. If you look at this ad from November 11th, I think, oh, look at this interesting, relevant social media marketing, excuse me, ad with a screenshot in it. You know, it's got 1,000 retweets, 2,000 hearts. That's fascinating. Then I looked a little more closely and realized, it's tagged November 2014. That's interesting. So they've been running this effective tweet for a year and going back and continuing to promote it. Now that's a successful tweet. To have it go out whenever it went out last year, obviously was effective in terms of driving traffic to this brand, contributing to the conversation and content marketing. Obviously something people found useful, and probably lots of downloads for their template, for the content calendar template. Apologies for the coughing. Always when I start recording, I start coughing. So even though it's a year old, they're still going back into sort of their inventory of tweets and using it to continue to promote today. I find that to be extremely interesting. So it doesn't have to always be current content in the feed, because it wasn't until even I, Twitter lecturer, Twitter, I'm not going to say expert, heavy Twitter user, didn't notice until I grabbed a screenshot and looked more closely at it. So when we're talking about targeting, again, if you've ever run ads on Facebook, you'll be familiar with targeting. There are lots of really quickly emerging options for targeting on Twitter when you're building an ad campaign. Whether you're targeting your followers or lookalike audiences, that's users who have similar behavior to your followers but aren't yet following your brand, or targeting by location. Oh my goodness, apologies everyone. All right, so before we jump into the case studies, I actually just want to dive into looking at Twitter, the platform, so that you can get a quick overview of what it looks like to start a campaign from scratch. So if we're looking at ads.twitter.com, and in this case, you can see I've got no current ads running for this brand I'm working with. Hi, Mama. But there are a few great things that you can know. What I like about Twitter advertising versus Facebook, it's actually a bit simpler, so it doesn't feel as overwhelming when you're starting to build out a platform, whereas Facebook ads, even for me who spent a lot of time and money and energy running Facebook campaigns, I still find it to be overwhelming to get started, because there's campaigns, ad sets, and then ads. In the Twitter world, all you have to do is head over to ads.twitter.com, and now we have this great new feature where Just like Facebook, Twitter is looking at promoting conversions of your promoted content and essentially being able to prove your return on investment in running ads on Twitter versus simply just promoting to get more followers. So before you do anything else, before you start building out any of the creative, Twitter wants you to tell them whether you're interested in gaining new followers, actually building a conversion or a sale to your website, getting and starting a conversation to new audiences in a Twitter engagement, whether you're looking at installing a mobile app, building leads on Twitter, so that's where you would promote filling out a form, whether you're encouraging video views, so you just want to, let's say you have a really successful YouTube video, and I know some of you students do, are working with video content really well, you might decide to basically do event tracking on the video plays for an ad or something custom. And if you're not sure, I've got a nice little menu here. In most cases, you're either going to be looking for conversions or you might be looking at tweet engagements. I would promote tweet engagements over followers because that's a promoted account, which is so narrow in focus. I'd much rather you build out good content, have it appear in the search feed or in a user's timeline than just in the who to follow field, which is such a narrow spot to be. So let's say we want to look at conversions. From there, so conversions, just as a recap for those who aren't familiar with it, so there's clicks to the website, meaning your ad drove me to click over to your website. Conversion is your ad drove me to click to your website and then do something, usually buy a ticket, sign up for a course, fill out a form, make a sale, shop, add something to cart, etc. So start by naming your campaign. In this case, we'll say we're going to call this the newsletter promotion, where we want people to sign up for our newsletter. Always think about whether or not you want it to run continuously or start and end dates. I tend to play in the set start and end dates, partially because I don't want to forget that I'm running a campaign and have it run forever and bill me a lot, although you can have limited budgets, of course, but also because in a lot of cases you might want to be strategic about whether or not you want your ad to run only during the week or only on the weekends, and that's where start and end dates can be really effective. Here we go with targeting. So targeting is the same as selecting your audience. And as we mentioned, there's a couple ways that you can target based on locations, multiple locations, right down to the postal code, which is fantastic if you have a database of users by area. So for I know some political marketers that are working with candidates, and targeting by postal code is extremely effective for them. Same with small businesses with brick and mortar stores. Postal code targeting can be really effective. Gender is important if you've got a specific gender. Content is in some way gender specific. And you find that, I mean, in a lot of cases, it's not going to be fantastic on Twitter because we don't always declare our gender one way or another. But you might have a reason to to target there, and your analytics and your metrics that we'll look at next week will tell you whether your audience skews one way or another. Devices is really important. So here's why this is important. First of all, you might choose to not show your ad to BlackBerry users because BlackBerry users, if you're selling, say, an iPhone app, because let's face it, your iPhone app's not being downloaded by Android and BlackBerry users. Or if we said at an interest targeting level, those people who are still on BlackBerries, and apologies if there are some students in the class still using a BlackBerry, even though it's a terrible app store, why would you show your ad to BlackBerry users if BlackBerry users are notoriously not technology early adopters, and you are promoting a technology brand or a new app or a download even to a newsletter? You might say that it's a waste of impression, so just be more specific with who you want to target. Also, Twitter tends to be a very mobile heavy platform. So you might say, I only want my ad shown to people who are actually on their mobile devices. Don't show it to the people who log in from the desktop, because people who are logging in from the desktop are either George Brown students or spending time at work. Just kidding. So then we have interest targeting. So you can upload your interest targeting by keyword if you've run AdWords and you've got a whole great database of keywords for targeting. That could be an effective strategy. You also can select one by one to do it. Now there's some clever things here you can do with followers that I've run in Twitter campaigns before. For instance, if we were, say, running a Christmas holiday shopping extravaganza campaign, it might make sense to target users that follow Oprah, given Oprah's favorite things. And when we add Oprah to our list of followers, we could then say, who else is like Oprah? And target Oprah's followers and or people who look like Oprah's followers. And that will get you a lot of the way there without having to dump a whole bunch of keywords into keyword targeting. So that could be really effective. Also, excluding audiences makes a lot of sense. So you could say, don't show my newsletter ad to everybody who's already on my newsletter, because that's a wasted impression again. So that could be really effective if you have a large newsletter list. Or you could say, don't show this to people who have visited my website already, because obviously they've been there and decided not to sign up for the newsletter, so it doesn't make sense to do that today. You can set a daily or a campaign-wide budget. Usually my advice is to say campaign-wide budget versus daily, because daily will be spent a lot faster. And daily, campaign-wise, let's say you have $500. You could run a daily campaign and put $100 a day behind the campaign for 5 days, but you might lose that $100 in the first, say, couple hours of impressions. Versus $500 over 5 days, Twitter will space out your ads so that you don't run out of money on the first day. And that could be really effective to ensuring that your campaign runs to different audiences throughout different times instead of throwing all your budget behind one day. Unless you have some sort of urgency you're trying to create and you want your content to go out through only one day, in which case then daily budgets might make sense. So as you can see, while we continue to target here, we can look and see at the estimated reach, the number of people who potentially might see this campaign. And that's really helpful to figure out whether or not you're going to be effective. Then the next step is creative. And this is going to be part of your assignment next week once we cover metrics. And that's to craft effective ad content on Twitter. And there's a few pieces that will make your ad effective, including the tweet itself, any call to action, whether it's click to the website, sign up for the newsletter, and an image. So it's important to have a call to action like learn more, book now, buy tickets, etc. And also I love the fact that the call to action buttons on Twitter are so much more varied than Facebook. I find this to be really great and specific to driving actions. But also the fact that you can include an image means you're more likely to be seen in those scrolling feeds of all Twitter users. And then save and you're ready to go. Wasn't that fast, simple? You've got a campaign. Now from there, your campaign goes live and it's important to log in daily to see how it's doing. It's also great to set up at least 3 campaigns at the same time so you can run a little mini A/B test on which tweet content or images is doing the best. Now anytime you're going to run multiple campaigns, you want to make sure you change as few variables as possible. So run 3 different tweet campaigns with the same picture but different language, or the same language and 3 different photos. That way you can identify what it is that's creating the effectiveness and not leave any unknowns for your analysis. All right, let's head back into some case studies of ad campaigns that I've really liked along the way. So some of these I pulled right from the Twitter website because they have big budgets to work with these brands, but they found their case studies were really effective in why, as a corporate entity, would I invest any money in Twitter ads? Because believe me, I'm someone who freelances in social media marketing, and lots of times I can justify Facebook, but I have a hard time justifying Twitter. And that's silly because either way, it's a campaign that's driving conversions. And if your user base is on Twitter, it's more affordable and effective to focus on a niche market than it is to go as wide as AdWords where everybody's Googling. Make sense? Anyway, for large brands, they don't have to stress about this too much and they can play around with some targeting. So in the case of Microsoft, what I liked here is that they did some country-specific targeting with separate campaigns for each, and then also used interest-specific targeting. So they, in this case, had up to 4 campaigns with separate topical, product, and demographic interest targeting. For example, they were targeting, say, online safety for areas where online safety comes up often in, say, Bing searches, so they know, or looking at Microsoft products that appeal directly to moms because they have the stats from either analytics or from other ad campaigns that suggest moms are interested in this value set in Microsoft products. Here's where it gets interesting. Here's some of the public results from Microsoft's Safer Online campaign that they ran. Their cost per follower decreased by 25%, meaning that it costs less money to get more followers. A fantastic metric. But not only, and they of course gained new followers along the way with their promoted tweets, because with the interest targeting, they reached new people that wouldn't have otherwise realized that Microsoft was on Twitter. But they also learned some things about their existing audience by optimizing for country and interest-specific targeting. For example, they learned that the US is specifically more interested in online safety organizations, while Germany is more interested in general Microsoft products. How could they possibly have had that level of specificity without running a campaign with interest targeting and then watching how their ads do across Twitter? This is massive, massive learning for brands where you're not sure why it is people are interested in what you do or what's driving the initial lead to the website. But by running specific geo and interest-based targeting campaigns on Twitter, you can learn a lot about your audience. Sharpie, here's another good stuff. Now, see, I loved this campaign because it was the perfect blend of art and technology, which is where my heart sings. So Twitter runs this campaign where they promote an existing tweet. Remember, you can promote an existing tweet. In this case, one that they didn't write. So Sharpie used promoted accounts with creative avatars to attract a following of artistic Twitter users, running this campaign around uncapping what's inside. So Sharpie coupled this with promoted tweets, promoted timeline campaign targeted to users who are interested in music, writing, creativity. You can see here they promoted an existing tweet by this undomestic diva who tweeted, "Sometimes you need to write like no one's going to read it." Love. Twitter helped Sharpie to acquire over 1,000 followers per day, increasing its follower base by over 6 times. Twitter's going to care more about followers than we do. But what's also interesting here is that the conversation really started and it flourished because of the campaign. Users began tagging their own conversations with creativity, or conversations about creativity, using the hashtag Sharpie, reflecting that there's a positive brand association between Sharpie and creativity, also known as hashtag winning. Red Cross. Here's another great case study. Red Cross, pretty famous for their tweets in the past. If you know that classic case study, here's a case of a Red Cross campaign where they were really promoting the perfect gift in the holiday season. This is last year. And they were looking at running Twitter campaigns that use the hashtag perfect gift, in which case any time where the perfect gift hashtag was retweeted or replied, that they would donate $1 up to $10,000. So nice social cause and quite effective for getting the word out. Look here at some great Twitter lists, just as a recap from last week. I loved the Twitter lists that American Red Cross built because they were so specific to local regions and also to specific disasters that were happening, so that you could follow the feed specific to that interest targeting. And remember, list creation is free. So that's great, Amanda. You're showing these giant case studies of these huge organizations with tons of money, but what about us little nonprofits or small businesses with no money? Aha, I have a case study for you. So I used to work for an organization called Time Raiser that raises volunteer hours in exchange for artwork in a silent auction format. And so I ran some campaigns to promote the Twitter events in both St. John's and in Edmonton and Calgary. So here's some really interesting thing. When I ran the Twitter campaign, our overall followers sort of grew, but I didn't find it to be terribly different from unpaid growth. So that's interesting to me. Now look at my budgets here. I threw like less than $100 for the whole campaign because I was just messing around with it a bit. But I wanted to see, will Time Raiser, this unknown brand with not much brand recognition at all and a really niche following on art and nonprofit events, will they gain a whole new untapped market of followers by running a promoted account? Or is my theory correct that it's a niche audience and there's only a limited number of people who are going to be interested in engaging with Time Raiser, the brand? And my test showed me I was right. However, It was really interesting when I started to look at promoted tweet content versus just promoted accounts. In this case, what I liked to see is that when we promoted Ottawa artists, so in the case of the fourth tweet down where we said, did you get our email this morning? Still looking for artists in Ottawa, up to $1,000 per piece. Let's go Ottawa. Lots and lots of click-throughs. Also a nice little discount on St. John's early bird tickets did really well. But because when I ran this campaign, there wasn't that same conversion targeting that we have now on Twitter, there wasn't any good way to see if those impressions or clicks actually turned into sales. Whereas now, thank goodness, you can track that. And because you can track that, in this case, if we say all 9 click-throughs of that bottom tweet to the St. John's Time Raiser turned into 9 $10 tickets, and I spent $6 to get it, I absolutely would run the same sort of investment again, even though we're talking about a full gigantic budget of $15 on Twitter ads. But if I spend $15 in Twitter ads and I make $90 in ticket sales, I win. So it doesn't really matter how much money you have on Twitter. It just matters whether or not the conversions are actually doing what you want. And you can be playing in single-digit numbers here, people, and still find effectiveness. This is an old article, but if you Google cost per follower, you'll find this is one of the still top cited articles, so I would absolutely encourage you to read it. And that's by Mashable that says, in this case study around promoted tweets, they were referring to a company that generated $139 million in ad sales in 2011, according from eMarketers. I'm totally messing this up for another case study I was thinking of. This is in Twitter sales that when people ask what's happening with Twitter and revenue, that Twitter's main revenue source is through ads and expected to grow in 2012 and continuing to grow since then. I have another Mashable link in this presentation that I'm going to mention and link you to that's really around the cost per follower. I don't know where I just got confused there. All right, so that's promoted tweets or promoted accounts. Now let's look at promoting the trends or hashtags. That's the one that shows up in search, right? So you actually, as a user, need to be in the search field in order to see this content. It's not going to show up in your feed itself. This is where you have time, context, and event-sensitive specific trends that are promoted by advertising partners. So they're not going to run constantly. They're going to run for a set specific amount of time, and they're going to be clearly marked as promoted, as we saw in that screenshot that I grabbed for you. Here's an example of showing up in a trending the night that a movie is released or an early film release. So that would be a trending topic that you might take over for the night, but you don't need to run for weeks at a time once a movie's been released. I like this idea of hover over content, but this quick bar where the breakout Kings promoted tweet showed up over the feed. Although it was great for a marketer, it was really annoyed Twitter users, wasn't popular, and eventually deactivated. So when we're thinking about targeting in search specifically, it's important to think about targeting existing users and also targeting new customers in order to create a highly relevant campaign. And then we've covered this while I went through the campaign itself, so you can go through this for your own writing. Whether you're targeting from lists, you're targeting from people who visited your website in the past, or people who have downloaded your mobile app. And that's recap. Analytics. I used to say for a long time that if you did nothing else, throw $10 a year behind Twitter ads because it gives you access to an analytics dashboard that you would not otherwise get. Although now Twitter, thankfully, just recently released Twitter Analytics and the Analytics dashboard for all users, whether or not you're a brand with an ads account or you're just a free Twitter account. And I think that was a really smart move. Either way, once you run an ad campaign on Twitter, and we'll dive into more metrics next week. But it's so interesting to, again, get some insight on the types of topics that your users who you've targeted or the ones who are following you are also interested. So if you're a restaurant and you see that your followers are interested in food, causes, nonprofits, and coffee, that would highly, highly influence the type of content that you're putting out through your Twitter feed in order to be effective. Here's a good screenshot on the right of gender balance in terms of male or female use, how often you're retweeted, and some of the followers who are like-minded towards the ones that are the same as you. When you're promoting accounts, I go back and forth on the effectiveness of this. I guess if you really think that having a ton more followers is going to help you to reach new audiences in the long run, so kind of playing a long game with building followers now in order to have conversations later, you can make that argument. I've seen it before. However, in general, I say promoted accounts are just not as effective as getting the actual content in the feed, where you can sort of see that multi-click attribution, if you will. Even if they don't click on your tweet the first time, they might see that content or that image and then come back to it a second time. Versus promoted accounts, all you've got is a logo. And so I don't love it as much, but it's possible. So if you see here, we've got on the very left-hand side who to follow, and that's the promoted accounts, versus a tweet on the right, which is a promoted tweet. And there's just so much more relevant content information to our users in that case. Some have asked about how to get that blue checkbox in verified accounts. There was speculation that you had to have a minimum of $15,000 in ad spend in order to get a verified account. What I've done in recent research has sort of suggested that verified accounts are they're easier to get for celebrities or big brands, and the reason why is because you have to have two accounts, where there's one that's sort of a spoof or a parody account and a real one, where Twitter users could get confused. Once you have the opportunity for confusion, then you're eligible to get a verified account, because Twitter wants users to know which one is the real and which one is the parody. So although there is some conspiracy theories that it comes down to ad spend, I think it has more to do with whether or not users are confused between two accounts. So profile pages have really changed a lot along the way. Now, we looked at profile pages last week when you were setting up your accounts. So I'm going to just jump through what they used to look like in terms of this band for branding. Now, this was a trial that started for big brands like CNN and McDonald's to test the cover photo before the cover photo was launched. What I like from an advertising perspective is you can think about how your cover photo could potentially be used to carry seasonal corporate messaging that otherwise doesn't make sense in a tweet, or you want to sort of pin to the top of your feed beyond whatever your actual pin to top feed is. Here's a case where one of my students utilized, is this one of my students? I might be making that up. I did have a student build a sandwich shop, but I think this was just a screenshot I grabbed along the way, where you can see lots of really great food imagery moved into both the cover photo or profile photo and the logo itself. I don't think that was one of my students. Here's the Mashable article I was talking about. Cost per Twitter follower, although this is an almost 5-year-old article, it still goes down in history as a really interesting study of how all of the metrics come into play for how much it costs every time you get a new follower, whether it's the engagement, clicks plus favorites or hearts plus retweets and replies, versus the number of people who have seen your tweet or your impression, your bidding or your auction, and your ability to promote your accounts. So if you're really interested in building out this very unique metric on your cost per follower, I would encourage you to read this Mashable link. Even if you just Google cost of Twitter follower, I'm pretty sure it's the first article that comes up. All right, here is your reference to some of the screenshots that I ran through live, which is how to set up a Twitter ad campaign based on targeting, your budgeting, your daily spend, and your content control. So feel free to click. Remember, you're starting with the type of campaign objective that you want to set. This is new for Twitter, but so important when we look at analytics and metrics for Twitter campaigns next week. and then go through here to grab any examples that you need of how to build an account. Also, I found for the most part, business.twitter.com, the business center for Twitter, has a really, really, really great help menu for running this through. So I would encourage you to look through their help menu if there's any thing you're not sure about in terms of running an ad campaign. So you have homework. You have no homework this week. Your homework will be for next week, but it is going to include building out your Twitter content. For now, I would love for you to tweet to me what you think makes a great tweet. Is it shareable content? Is it when something's funny, humorous? Is it when it's less than 140 characters? Because 140 characters is just too much to read. Or is it when they include photos? So tell me what you think makes a great tweet, and this will be relevant to the type of ad campaign content that you'll be asked to build next week. All right, everyone, apologies for the delay in getting this lecture up this week. Hope everybody has a fantastic rest of the week looking into Twitter ads, and I really hope some of you decide to at least build the creative and campaign targeting out for Twitter so that we can see where your heads are at and some creative content campaigns that you come up with. Take care. Tweet you later.